defense puts us at tremendous risk. If it were returned, we would lose $15 billion of purchasing power, which would degrade readiness. It would degrade our modernization even further.
And OCO is a gimmick.
And the funding for OCO cannot be relied upon for the long run, and we need that predictable funding.
General Milley, struck by you mentioned the words "hollow army." That this committee has not heard that since General Shai Meyer came over and said it back in the 1970s. How far away are we from a hollow army?
I believe, Senator, that if we continue on the road and we execute the BCA or go back to BCA caps and fundings and continue with CRs, it will result in a hollow army. How far away? I think right now, what you did last year was you stopped a downward trend. You halted it, stopped the bleeding, so to speak. We turned a corner, and we are, in fact, making slow but steady progress in readiness. If that stops, we will eventually, in not too distant future, have a hollow army and put soldiers at risk on a battlefield. And
the trend as you see it right now?
The trend is that for the Army's trend in terms of readiness, I think we have stopped it, stopped the downward trend, and I think we started to recover last year with the monies that you gave us.
But
we have a long way to go.
But the fact is that this budget may, at least as far as readiness is concerned, just stop the bleeding, right? It doesn't address the urgent need for modernization. Is that a correct statement?
There is modernization, obviously, in the budget. We put about 26% or so into modernization. But that's relative because 8 years, 2008, we had, roughly speaking, 3 times that amount of money into modernization. And if you go back 15 to 20 years, it's significantly more. So your assessment is correct. Our modernization has been sacrificed for current readiness.
Can I just, again, go back to this acquisition? Future Combat System, $20 billion. Comanche, $5.9 billion. Crusader, $2.2 billion. Helicopter, $500 million. Ground Combat Vehicle, $1 billion. Distributed Common Ground System Army, $3 billion. Joint Tactical Radio System, $11 billion. And of course, now we're looking at this WIN-T debacle. As you know, 2 years ago, we passed legislation that gave you a lot more control over acquisition. What's happened since then? And control and input, I guess, is a better description.
And I thank you for that. And we've made actually quite a bit of reforms in the acquisition system already. Not 100% complete yet, but we have a key thing that we've done is reinserted the commanders into the acquisition process. For many years, it was staff-centric. I am personally inserted into it in a big way, along with the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. We re-energized what was called an AROC system, which had gone fallow for a while, and that is meeting weekly, and it determines the requirements of the systems. We've also initiated the RCO, the Rapid Capabilities Office. The bottom line is what we're trying to do is through insertion of the chief and others in uniform into the acquisition system is to reduce the time and speed up the procurement and get the taxpayer the best bang for the buck, so to speak.
And yet it still seems to take years.
It does, and it's very frustrating.
Somebody told me the other day that the aircraft that I flew, the A4, they put out A4 Skyhawk, that it took 4 weeks. 4 weeks, and they were ready to let a contract. Now, we were just discussing a new replacement for the incredibly failed LCS, and they said, we may be ready for an RFP by 2020.
Right.
What's the difference, General? And if some of us feel frustrated, it's hard for us to continue to fight for more money when we see $6 billion wasted on one program.
Yeah.
So give me some comfort, either one of you.
Well, Chairman, I think you heard some of it already in terms of that, and we thank you for what you've allowed already to push it down. The role of Chief back into that and pushing it back down to the services, more rapid decisions. A lot of that $40+ billion you just read off are a disgrace. But at the same time, we're getting after, we can't hold the future mortgage notes, and so we do need to modernize. The list the Chief gave you is a good start. We are working on a regular basis to push those down, involving costing, doing strategic portfolio analysis that Chief's heavily involved in. We've got to get costing and quicker decision-making processes and make informed, rapid decisions in fielding this equipment.
Is it of interest that 90% of defense spending is in the hands of 5 companies? Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, Army Readiness, the brigade combat teams, is, as I understand now, roughly 30%. Is that a fair judgment about the readiness status?
Roger, that's correct. The exact readiness, I'd be happy to brief you or your staffs from classified
Right,
session, but
understand.
as an order of magnitude,
Sure, we're in that ballpark. And
right. And the goal, of course, is 66%.
66%. And what are the 2 or 3 key steps that you have to take, you think, to get from what it is today to that 66%?
There's several of them, but the most significant right now, the drag, if you will, is manning. Many of these units are not at the full manning level, and that drags down their readiness in terms of the reporting system we have, but also in terms of going out to training and or deployment. So if a unit, we have a significant amount of non-deployables still. We've dropped that number by 2/3 over the last 5 years, but there's still a significant amount of non-deployables. So if we fill units at 95%, you have 10% non-deployables, it takes you 85%, you take away the day-to-day grind, you're down to 80% or less that goes out to training. That is not a good thing. You should at least be 90, 95% when you go out to training. You go to the Combat Training Center, NTC, JRTC. So manning is a critical drag on the system. We have made improvements because of the money you gave us in terms of spare parts and making the equipment better, so that's a good news story there. But the manning has continued to drag. So with the authorization in 17 to take us to 476, what we want to do is make the existing force structure whole. There are some minor force structure increases in this budget request, but we want to make the force structure that does exist complete, whole, and fully ready before we move on to the next step, which is expanding the Army.
And in that regard, I understand 10% of the non-deployable personnel are non-deployable for medical reasons.
About 85 to 90% actually are
Medical.
The rest of them are legal and other reasons.
And how are you trying to get at that? Is there something in terms of enhanced training or lifestyle or anything else that seems to be a significant problem?
Yeah, the majority of those are orthopedic type injuries. Most are recoverable with some extended profiles, so they're non-deployable in the short term. Total Army, out of the million-plus troops, about 20,000, about 2% or so, are hard down. They'll never be able to deploy. And those we're working through the IDES system. And the number of days it takes to process them has come down from well over a year in the 370s, 390s range of days. We got it down by 100 days to 270. So we're trying to chip that away so that reduces the number of permanent non-deployables down, and the VA then picks up their care. But there's several things we have to do internal to the organization.
But one of the things I assume you have to do is improve recruitment and retention in order to get to just fill up the current existing force structure. Is that accurate?
Our recruitment and retention right now are at this point, are meeting the goals. Last year, we had 100% across the board. To date this year, we're about 80% or so for recruitment, and we're about 75% to date. Of course, the year's not finished yet on retention. With the increase in the end strength authorization of 476, we significantly increased the recruiting and retention missions. I think we'll be within 1% plus or minus of achieving that by 1 October.
In terms of modernization, there's a tendency to make incremental improvements in equipment. And as the chairman pointed out, when it takes so long to develop a new system, that incremental improvement is in many cases almost obsolete by the time it gets to the troops. If you're looking for a leap ahead, system, is there one out there that you think would make a huge difference that could?
It depends on the category. In the area of shoot, There are some technologies in laser, electromagnetic guns. There's some things being done with powders, et cetera, that can reduce the footprint of powder. So there are some significant enhancements in the S&T and R&D world that we're exploring aggressively, and some of those are already being employed by the Navy in quantities, but they're not sufficient yet for ground combat. In terms of move, there's a lot of things that we're looking at in terms of robotics and autonomous systems. Chairman McCain mentioned the tank. I couldn't agree more. That the M1A1 Abrams tank was commissioned when I was lieutenant in 1980. That would be the equivalent of someone coming in when I was commissioned training on the M4 Sherman from World War II. His comment about quoting H.R. McMaster's about outgunned and outranged is accurate. We need a significant 10x level improvement in our ground combat vehicle, in our tank in Bradley. Is there something on the horizon? We are going to continue with incremental improvements to those two systems in the near term, but while we explore the possibility for 10x improvement. There are some bright lights out there. Look, for example, at what Tesla just did. They have cars now that were 100,000 or 40,000, and they just beat out GM and Ford, and they don't have an engine. They're running on a battery. There's some serious possibilities in there for application of military use, and we're looking at that. There are some exploratory studies being done in materials, significant material development that can provide the same protective power at a much significantly less weight. So there's things in the area of move. Communications, move should communicate sort of binning. For communications, Chairman McCain mentioned WEN-T and the others. The communications architecture of the United States Army, and I would argue even the United States Department of Defense, is a critical capability and at the same time a critical vulnerability, as it is for most other nation states. And there's some significant, and I don't want to go into too much on it for classification purposes, but there are some significant changes and improvements that must be made in the short term on our ability to have assured communication, and I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had hearing after hearing after hearing, and we talk about the threat level that's there, and I think we all agree, but I want to talk about that. But on this acquisition thing, I was 8 years in the House on the House Armed Services Committee before coming over here 20 years ago. And with the business background, it drives you crazy to see these things happen. The FCS, we went through this thing, and I guess the figure on that the chairman just talked about was $20 billion. That was from 2001 to 2010. Now, and then along came the Crusader, and I was here during that time. That actually was terminated by Bush in his administration. So when you make the statement, General Milley, that you don't want to make the mistakes of the past, how can you do that unless we change and improve the acquisition system? You are complimentary of the chairman, and that we have made last year some changes where you have a greater impact on making those decisions. But still, they were made by the administration. In fact, in the case of the Crusader, one of the really outstanding guys on the House Armed Services Committee resigned. He quit because of the fact that you get that huge investment, then you turn around and abandon it. So I guess my question to you is what we did in starting to give you more latitude in helping with those decisions on acquisition and terminations, do we need to go further?
I believe, yes, we do, but I do appreciate the reforms that were made in the last cycle, and they have made a difference. And I can see that in several systems, small systems like the pistol, you saw that, up to larger systems that we're doing for like the ITEP engine for the UH-60 and several other programs that are out there, the PIM program for the Paladin and others that are out there. So there is a difference being made. In terms of big ticket items like a brand new tank or a brand new helicopter, no, not yet. And part of that is because of limitations in current and existing technologies. So I do think there's been progress made, and I do think that the enhanced authorities that were given to the chiefs has made a difference, and I appreciate that.
Well, you mentioned the PIM program, which of course was taking an old system and upgrading it
That's
as
right.
opposed to a brand-new system. Was that the right decision at that time?
I believe yes.
I think-
Again, it goes back to technologies. I think we're on the, my assessment is we're on the cusp. We're
Yeah.
within 10 years of a fundamental change in the character of warfare and the character of ground warfare.
Yeah, we also talked about, in response to the question, I think it was Senator McCain, about a hollow army. I chaired a committee of the vices just 3 weeks ago. And at that time, it was Wilson with the Air Force, and he had said, we're already there in the Air Force in terms of the hollow Air Force. So that's, you know, a few of us up here are old enough to remember the Carter administration and how we tried to recover from that. And I'm sure that we're going to try to keep from having that happen again. Now, before Senator Sullivan starts talking, because he's going to penetrate this a lot more than I will, because there isn't time. But when you look at all the threats that are out there, a lot of us come to the conclusion that it really North Korea is it, for two primary reasons. One, it's run by a mentally deranged guy that no one can predict. And secondly, they are rapidly getting to the point, as came out from the examination by Senator Sullivan yesterday or the day before, with that capability that it could, you know, it's not a matter, I think they said not a matter of if, but when. So why don't you just concentrate, if you would, just on North Korea for the remainder of my last 45 seconds here, on why you, if you agree with us in terms of that being the greatest threat.
Well, Senator, you know, we're in a current war against ISIS, and probably the greatest capability out there remains Russia. But clearly, North Korea is probably the most dangerous, close in terms of time threat, in my view, that the United States faces. And they are rapidly developing an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear weapon attached that can range the continental United States. And I don't think that we should allow that, and I don't think that's the policy of this nation. And I believe the President of the United States when he says that if China doesn't solve it, the United States will. So I think that's the right approach, but I do think it's increasingly dangerous. There's no question the path they're on. I don't want to go into things that we do, but it is dangerous.
Well, I do believe in the hearings that we've had, both the civilians and the uniforms alike have talked about how great the threat is. And you guys, and I appreciate the fact that you're doing it, we don't have the credibility out on the stump to talk about this, and particularly when you have a media who doesn't believe you. But with the military talking about it, I think that's significant. So I do applaud you and the others for not veering away from the threat that's out there, and it's very real. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your distinguished service to our nation. I want to pursue the questioning on North Korea. You said close in terms of time to developing an intercontinental ballistic missile. How close?
I'd rather take that into a classified session, Senator, with all due respect. And there's a variety of analysis out there, and there are ranges. And I'd be happy to walk you through at least what I know from my perspective, and we can get some experts in to brief you as well, if you'd like.
Wouldn't the American people be well served by more information about this threat so that they do appreciate what the facts are?
I think that's probably an accurate statement, sure.
And in terms of the troops that the United States Army has at potential risk from conventional artillery, how many would you estimate are in harm's way?
Well, the United States has, you know, publicly 28,500 troops of all branches. In Korea, roughly speaking, about 20,000 of those are Army. And North Korean conventional tube and rocket artillery has extensive range, can range all Seoul, it can range most of the military compounds. So our troops are at risk in Korea.
In your testimony, you mentioned the importance of vertical lift in the Army's modernization priorities. And as you know better than any of us, the Black Hawk has served the United States Army for some 35 years. It continues to be the aviation backbone of the Army. Could you tell us what the state of negotiations are for the next procurement of Blackhawks?
Well, we've got, I want to say 48 that we've put into this budget. We're also working on the ITEP engine, which is equally as important as the airframe in order to enhance the capability of the Blackhawk to fly at high altitude, around 6,000 feet or so, and at high temperatures, around 95 degrees. So both the procurement of additional helicopters and the modernization of the engine, improved engine, are significant for the lift capability of the Army.
Wasn't the expectation from the future years defense program projected for FY18 that there would be 60, not 48 helicopters in the budget?
I would have to go back and check that number, Senator.
Do you believe that more than 48 are necessary?
Yes. I mean, in order to flesh out and replace existing aircraft, sure. And you know, when we get past 18, we have plans to do that.
A number of your colleagues, heads of services, have said that the greatest threat, or perhaps one of the greatest threats, if not the greatest threat to our nation, is cyber. And I've noted in your testimony that relatively little analysis has been included about cyber.
Well, yeah, cyber is a very serious threat, and others have testified openly that the opening shots of a large-scale conflict are likely to begin with cyber, and various people have testified to that, and you see that in writings, and I'd probably concur with that. Cyber is a very serious capability out there. What we, the Army, are doing is fielding 61 cyber, what we call cyber protection teams, and 41 of those are in the regular Army, and 21, or correction, 20 are in the 41 and 21, 62 for the National Guard and the United States Army Reserve. Of the ones in the regular Army, they should all reach full operating capability by the end of 18.
The chairman and I have noted, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I'm limited in terms of time, that there really is no cyber strategy. Without a cyber strategy, there can be no cyber policy. I think I'm quoting almost directly what the chairman said yesterday. And that has been a failing, to be very blunt, under a number of administrations. Would you agree that we need a cyber strategy to determine, for example, what is an act of cyber war? How do we respond to a cyber attack in the cyber domain?
Right. I mean, fair question, and I think that needs to be debated. It's an answer, a question that needs to be asked and answered. It's not asked and answered right now. Well, what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace? And I'm certainly not in a position to answer that. But in terms of capability, the Army does have a cyber strategy for capabilities, capability development, and our emphasis is on defense for the Army. The national part does offense, Army does, the services doing defense. And what's important for us is to protect our network, protect our ability in the electromagnetic spectrum from everything from degraded operations or complete shutdown all the way to spoofing and mimicking and so on and so forth. We have set up the first, as far as I know in the world, live cyber range at the National Training Center. So all of our tactical units now are cycling through the training center where they're being exposed to an enemy, a free-thinking OPFOR out at the training center that executes high-end cyber operations against our own units. And our soldiers are learning to come to grips with that. And it's a very interesting thing to go watch, to see how our forces operate with the WIN-T or any of the other communication systems we have, where they are under constant attack from the enemy, and they are getting degraded, and we have to relearn how to operate with limited degraded communications and our connectivity to higher headquarters and adjacent units. So we do have a strategy for capability development. But the national strategy you're talking about, I think that's fair.
I would like to also add to that when it comes also to the individuals and the people we're assessing and training. We've got, of the 41 active component cyber teams, 33 of them are already mission capable, fully mission capable. Another 8 are initial capabilities. The Cyber Center of Excellence, as well as private industry, are working out on a regular basis to incorporate additional capabilities and understanding, and we're assessing individuals in training and development into the reserve components as well.
Thank you, Secretary Spear. Thank you, General. Thank you.
Secretary Spear and General Milley, let me start off by asking about the Lakota, the Army's primary training helicopter, and how the situation currently affects the industrial base. The last production contract was awarded in 2015. There's an ongoing legal dispute which is expected to remain in the courts until late this year. Absent new order soon, the manufacturing plant may be forced to lay off workers. The FY17 omnibus appropriated $198 million to purchase 28 Lakotas. And there is clear directive in the language the Army must obligate the funds to buy Lakotas, although this has not happened. I know this is an important program because the Army requested $100 million in FY18 for 13 additional Lakotas. But how are we coming on the directive to obligate the funds to buy the 28 Lakotas from the FY17 omnibus bill, and what are our prospects for moving along on the 2015 contract?
Senator, I think you hit it initially. We need the Lakotas in terms of the training base and get them down there in terms of Rucker to go. The 2017 funding is held up in that same protest. So we need to buy against that contract to be able to deliver in a timely basis, and that current contract is under protest, and we hope that will be resolved next quarter of this year. And then we'll be able to put the additional funds on contract and request the additional 28.
So that would be July, August, or September?
That's what we're hoping so, later this summer, yes.
Okay, and General, you do agree that this is a very important program?
I'll be candid, Senator. It's important, it has utility, but a Lakota aircraft won't survive a nanosecond in combat. It is good for administrative use. It is good for running soldiers around at home station, and it's very good for training. However,
it is a training.
It's a training platform, so I don't want to overstate its importance. What we need to invest our aviation dollars into primarily are combat utility aircraft and attack aircraft. The Lakota has a purpose. It has a place in the system. That's why we put the money in there. But I don't want to overstate or elevate its importance within the pantheon of aviation.
Okay. Well, let me ask. Then let me shift to one other thing in the time I have remaining, and I want to ask about MRAPs. In 2013, the Army decided to divest a large portion of MRAPs. Things are different now than they were in 2013. We're ramping back up in Afghanistan. ISIS is more of a threat than it was then. Is it time to take a fresh look at the MRAP program?
I think in terms of the MRAPs, we did retain a set of MRAPs for this kind of operation contingency, and I believe we have sufficient MRAPs of different varieties and variants to support. Now, I can go back and look and come back to you in terms of the latest review on MRAPs, but the current threat in terms of decisive action, training, and obligation is where the biggest risk is for the longer term. We do, I believe, have sufficient variants of MRAPs to do operations against ISIS or counterterrorism.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk a bit about procurement to either or both. What lessons has the Army learned from the procurement problems that we've had in the past with the Comanche, the Crusader, Future Combat System? Are there lessons learned that we can apply to future acquisitions?
We could spend all day on the lessons learned on those, and I think we got after a lot of them. First of all, we took the decision maker.
I only have 5 minutes.
I got it, Senator. It's part of the decision, if you look at a lot of the list laundry list, was we removed the decision maker from where the functional decision of the requirement was. We've built in layers and layers of decision-making processes that took too long. Cost was not an informed cost. We made decisions at the end of the requirements after we spent a lot of money, when we could have made discoveries much earlier on. So that's part of what the chief's getting at, and I'm getting at in terms of this. We've got to be at cost early in front. We've got a decision allowed to fail up front. We've got to be able to prototype in those things, and we've got to put the warfighter back into the decision process down where the execution of that program goes.
Was one of the problems expansion of requirements and complexity of requirements?
I think the complexity of the requirements expanded and always been there technology-wise, but again, the requirement was best understood by the individuals who were building the requirement and have to provide feedback on how well they're doing with the requirement on the delivery of the capability.
Well, General Milley, on this point, we had a very interesting hearing in the Airland Subcommittee a couple of weeks ago on a new rifle for the Army to replace the M4. One of the things we learned was that the current M4 caliber ammunition will not penetrate the newly developed body armor of our adversaries, which is, to me, a disaster in waiting. Your thoughts on a new weapon, and how do we do the procurement in a timely and cost-effective way and avoid some of these problems that we've had in the past? First, do you think this is an important area of attention? And second, can we pull it off in a reasonable amount of time at a reasonable cost?
I think yes and yes. I think it is critically important. 70% of American casualties are ground forces, typically infantry, special forces type units or units performing infantry missions. And the small arm and the other equipment, to include body armor, SAPI plates, and so on, is critical. And we ought to be providing the very, very best for our soldiers that our nation can provide. The 5.56 round, we recognize that there is a type of body armor out there that it doesn't penetrate. We also have that body armor ourselves. And that adversarial states are actually selling that stuff on the internet for about $250. So yes, there's a need and there's an operational need, and we think we can do it relatively quickly. The key on any of these things is not so much the rifle, it's the bullet. It's the ballistics of the bullet, and down at Fort Benning, we've done some experiment and developmental work. We think we have a solution. We know we have developed a bullet that can penetrate these new plates.
Does this bullet require a new rifle?
It might, but probably not. It could. It can be chambered, and the bullet can be chambered in various calibers. I don't want to get into the technicals of ballistics, but it can be modified to 5.56, 7.62, or...
Is there a possibility of an off-the-shelf, an existing rifle that could be an upgrade to the M4?
Yes. There's several options out there.
And that would be an option.
There's absolutely options out there.
I commend that option to you.
Sure.
The FY budget request holds the Army end strength at 476,000, 343,000 National Guard, 199 Reserve. Are those numbers sufficient in your professional judgment to meet the challenges that we have in terms of readiness and assuming a higher level of training and readiness? And secondly, how long does it take? If we decide we need 10,000 more or 20,000 more end strength, how long does it take to get from decision to troops in the field?
The first part of that question, is it enough, so to speak? That depends on what we're asked to do. Secretary Mattis is leading a very rigorous and detailed strategic review of the defense planning guidance and the national military strategy. That review will be done probably sometime in the fall. When that review is done, that will give us our baseline of how well or how big and what capabilities we will need across the board as a military, not just the Army. In the meantime, we do already have a national military strategy and a defense planning guidance, and as I testified last year, I thought that the capacity, the size of the force, and the capability of the modernization of the weapon systems did not meet that. And 476 improves it, but no, it still does not meet the worst-case requirements that are outlined in the National Military Strategy and the Defense Planning Guidance.
Second question, how long does it take to build up?
Well, To build units, to put a brigade together from scratch, I would say it would take about 3 years to get them at a reasonable level of training. But soldiers coming through basic training in AIT, individual replacements, they're falling in on existing force structure and existing units, and that takes considerably less time. And then one of the things we're introducing in this bill is security force assistance brigades, which are essentially chains of command of an infantry chain of command, for example, an infantry brigade. They'll be used for deployment overseas to do advise and assist missions, like what you see in Iraq and Afghanistan today. That'll free up the brigades that are there. We'll put those back together again, and then it will shorten the timeline for rapid expansion. We plan on introducing 5 of those. We've got 2 in this particular budget for the request. So it varies by type unit, but on average, I would say between 1 and 3 years, 3 years being the outside, to put together enough of the force and the collective training, assuming you had the people and the money to support that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen, thank you for your appearance this morning. I want to return to an issue that Senator McCain foot-stomped in his opening statement, WIN-T, the Warfighter Information Network Tactical, the way the soldiers communicate on the battlefield. In 2003, the Army planned for future combat systems that would, among other things, network together soldiers and vehicles. That program was canceled in 2009 at the cost of approximately $18 billion. WIN-T was part of the Future Combat Systems program. After Future Combat System was canceled, it was another attempt by the Army to conduct secure battlefield communications and networking. General Milley, I have seen credible reports that WIN-T has ineffective line-of-sight communications, is not survivable, is too fragile to survive in a contested environment, and has an electromagnetic signature so loud that it practically would call for enemy artillery on the top of its users' heads. Have you seen similar reports?
Yes, and what we've done is, with the authorities that the chairman and the committee and the Congress gave us a couple of years ago, is I and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, along with a small group of people, are driving a rigorous, thorough, and painful review of the entire communication electromagnetic capabilities of the U.S. Army, of which WIN-T is one part of, because we have the same concerns. Frankly, my concern is these systems may or may not work in the conditions of combat that I envision in the future with this changing character of warfare. Because of what you just cited, line of sight, electromagnetic spectrum, the inability to operate on the move, the inability to operate in large, dense, complex urban areas or complex terrain. And there's a whole series of other things. And it is fragile, and it is vulnerable. So we're taking a very, very, very deep, hard, and wide look. We've probably got about 6 weeks or so, because what I want to do is make sure I can get it into any changes to this cycle, the markups that we can, if we need to. There's piece parts of it that work very well. There's others that not so good. And we're taking a hard look. And as you may or may not be aware, I've received a letter from the House with 176 signatures on it, and a letter from the Senate with several signatures on it, asking me to accelerate that program. I'm not going to accelerate it until I'm convinced it will work in combat against the enemies of our country that may be coming in the future. So that's kind of where we stand right now. But I owe you and this committee and others a rigorous review within about 4 to 6 weeks or so.
Thank you, General. I'm aware of those letters. My first priority is delivering functional systems to our warfighters on the front lines. My second priority is good value for our taxpayers. The political implications of these contracts in members' districts are a very low priority compared to those for me, as I'm sure they are for you as well. We've spent about $6 billion so far on WIN-T, haven't we?
That's correct.
If the program's not working, it doesn't seem, as you say, like we should be accelerating more money into that program until we can get it to work, or we can find a replacement. Is that a fair assessment?
Correct, and that's where we're at, and I'm trying to figure out exactly what parts of it could be accelerated or brought online, others that we need to not. Continue to put good money after bad, and make sure that the system as a whole, a holistic review of the system, is something that is going to be effective in what we think will be a dynamic combined arms maneuver fight on a very, very highly contested and lethal battlefield.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the effort you've put into not just these kind of communications programs we've discussed before, the distributed common ground system and its problems, You were discussing earlier some of the issues with small arms that the Army has had. I want to encourage you to continue to use those authorities. Most of these problems arose long before you took office, but I want to encourage you to continue to try to address them and resolve them at the speed that our warfighters need, not the speed of bureaucrats in Washington. I want to turn briefly to the European Reassurance Initiative. I know you've taken it very seriously. I'm encouraged by the hill-to-toe deployments we've seen of armored BCTs as part of the initiative. Do you think a permanent armored BCT presence would be preferable, though, to a perpetual state of deployment?
My recommendation, my preference, for a lot of reasons, is a rotational schedule, heel-to-toe rotational schedule, which has the effect of a permanent unit in there in terms of battlefield effect, but it doesn't come with the cost and overhead of a permanently stationed force. I know Chairman Thornberry in the House has asked us to take a look and cost that out. Others are interested in permanent stationing. At this point, my recommendation is continued rotational forces, vice permanent station. What that gets you is flexibility when you're over there, where you can move from one country to another, because these forces won't be pinned down to a single installation. You won't have to resurrect all the commissaries, the PXs and the schools, et cetera. Families won't be put into a potential conflict zone, and you'll get battle-focused training on an increased unit cohesion for the unit training. I think the way to go is rotational for the brigade combat team, but I'm willing to take a good look at it.
Thank you.
Senator, could I add to that? Because just when I visited the ERI operations currently in Europe, I would add that the commander, the brigade commander, said the same thing in terms of units, the best training he's had. The spread, how well he was spread across the theater of operations. He could not get, if he were stationed in one location, he'd have to go across and spread his organization anyhow on a recurring basis. The combat aviation brigade may be a different situation. There was challenges there, but I think we're working through this. Tremendous lessons learned coming out of that kind of rotation for readiness.
Well, thank you. And I've heard similar things in my trips to the Baltics, and an important reminder for the American people that we're not just deploying troops there for the benefit of those nations, but for the very good training that our troops receive there as well. Thank you, gentlemen.
General, the WIN-T program has been in existence for over a decade. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, Senator.
So should we expect a decision on WIN-T on the part of the administration at some point after we've spent $6 billion?
Yes, and
Don't the taxpayers of America deserve something better than that?
absolutely, and that's why we began 4 months ago, the Vice and I and others,
So
Secretary,
it took only
to rigorously review this.
9.5 years before we undertake a extensive review. Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Spear, yesterday the Army's budget was released, and again, there were no military construction projects to support the testing and evaluation missions at White Sands Missile Range. That actually makes 18 years in a row now, and certainly White Sands is not alone. So I am concerned that the Army is not currently prioritizing testing infrastructure, and nor are the other services. I know that others share my concern that the Pentagon is not doing enough to upgrade our testing capabilities, which would ultimately allow us to keep our competitive edge over our adversaries. So, Secretary, do you believe that the Department is effectively managing and allocating resources for military construction projects at our test ranges?
I think broadly, it's part of the overall situation with military construction. We still continue to take a little bit of risk in the military construction. What we do find, and I believe, and I go back and confirm this, within this, we put additional restoration modernization to upgrade facilities within the budget, which included a test range. We doubled that amount this year for restoration modernization. We have a $10.8 billion backlog in such restoration and modernization requirements.
I would just urge you to look really closely at test ranges generally. I think you're taking a lot more risk there than you are in other places, and it's just absolutely critical in terms of developing the technologies that are going to pay off for our warfighters in the future. In a related issue, as you're aware, White Sands is managed by the Army, but it's a test range that the Air Force uses as well, the Navy uses, obviously the Army uses. Does it make sense for the Army to be the only service responsible for funding major military construction projects on what is a tri-service testing range?
Well, Senator, much like other installations where we're the executive agent or we are the owner of it, that's the way we prioritize. We work together with our sister services to identify requirements across the joint community, and I think we'll continue to do so. I think it's been the past, predictable funding and level of funding to get at the stability, to take care of things on a recurring basis, and we took risk over time on those things. And you have my commitment. I'll go back and review those things, because I would agree, as part of what we talked about earlier in the acquisition process, earlier testing and the ability to look at things earlier in the testing cycle is very important.
I appreciate your commitment on that, and I want to just highlight one military construction project at White Sands in particular, because it sort of tells the story of what is being passed up over the course of the last 2 decades. The Network Communications Center for the range was built in 1962. It actually caught fire a couple of years ago, but it has not been a priority in recent years. And I think in the era of big data and technology, a modern information facility is pretty critical for transmitting the vast amounts of data that pass through White Sands at this point, for the data that's being generated during those tests. So that's just one particular example. General Milley, I really appreciated your comments earlier about some of the things that are on the horizon in terms of emerging technologies and some of the things that are really right in front of us. And in April, Admiral Harris testified before this committee and stated several times that we have no defense against North Korean rockets, North Korean artillery, North Korean mortar rounds. From a defensive standpoint, does the Army have an effective indirect fire protection capability at this time?
Against what type of indirect fire? Rockets, missiles?
Rockets, artillery, mortar rounds.
We have capabilities that can shoot down incoming missiles.
Right.
That's THAAD, Patriot.
Yeah.
In terms of bullets, tube artillery, or close-range rockets, we're experimenting right now with hypervelocity capabilities. We think we can field those pretty shortly. I think you've seen some of that both in the media and have been briefed on it by Will Roper at DOD. That's an Army program he's working on, and we're funding that. And that will be important if we can make that happen, and that'll increase significantly our capability to shoot down incoming rounds.
In addition to kinetics, which tend to be incredibly expensive on a per-round basis, I was very pleased to see that the Army budgeted for next-generation weapon systems by funding the 50-kilowatt high-energy laser on a Stryker vehicle. And I think that shows enormous potential. Not just potential, I think we're at a place now where we've shown that we can shoot down mortars with realistically funded lasers and do it on a very low cost per shot capability. So I would urge you to continue to focus on that.
But I don't want to mislead you. These programs are not ready for prime time yet in the fielded force. So you're talking several years there of consistent, predictable funding to make those real, developed, and distributed to the force. Several years. If an event happens prior to then, there's significant risk to those enemy weapon systems that you talked about.
I think we may differ on just how far out that timeline is.
Situation today is that they literally have the capability to set Seoul on fire. Is that correct?
I think that North Korean capability that's arrayed north of the DMZ is very significant, and it would do unbelievable damage. It would be a tragedy of immense proportions on a city of Seoul with 27 million people and a population density of 4 times that of New York City. It would be huge. And their tube and rocket artillery alone can pump in 250,000 rounds a day into that city. It would be huge. It would be enormous.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and General Milley. Mr. Secretary, good to see you, General. And Mr. Secretary, appreciated the opportunity to visit yesterday. I wanted to follow up on Senator Inhofe's questions with regard to North Korea. So it has been stated a number of times in this committee by military experts that it is no longer a matter of if, but when North Korea is going to have an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile that can range the entire United States of America. Do you agree with that assessment?
I'd say it depends on what we...
If, but when?
Well, I'd say it depends on what we do, Senator.
Well, let me actually get to that. And by the way, I actually agree with Senator Blumenthal's point about allowing the American people to have a sense of when that may or may not, both classified and unclassified, but I think getting it out there will prepare the U.S. public for a really challenging national security issue that I don't think a lot of people are paying attention to. Yesterday in testimony, or 2 days ago in testimony, Director Coates stated it was the policy of the United States to prevent that capability from ever being realized. Is that your understanding of the policy, General?
Absolutely. That's my understanding of the current United States government's policy is to prevent North Korea from fielding an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear weapon to strike the continental United States. I believe
So that's a red line in some ways that we...
I wouldn't use that word. I don't use any words like that, but I believe that's the U.S. policy is to prevent that capability from being fielded by North Korea.
So if we had to take action against North Korea to prevent that from happening, would your U.S. Army forces and the entire weight and power of the U.S. military dominate the battlefield to make sure we achieve that goal? If we had to?
I mean, I believe yes, but I don't want to go much beyond that. Absolutely yes, us and the Rock Army would dominate the battlefield. North Korea would not succeed, and North Korea would lose. The cost would be huge, but North Korea would lose.
Let me actually, two questions. Do you need anything more? What do you need from this committee or the Congress to ensure that we would dominate and prevail if that day, God forbid, ever came?
I think the priorities that we laid out in our opening statements and are in the budget, that's what I think we need. And most importantly, we need predictable funding over time.
Let me ask, General, you and I both talked about the book T.R. Fehrenbach's This Kind of War a number of times, the whole issue of no more task force Smiths. Could you describe what a war with Korea, North Korea would look like, and would it be similar to what we've seen over the last 15 years in Iraq and Afghanistan?
No, it would not look anything like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan.
What would it look like?
Well, it depends on the, our actions, action, reaction, counteraction. There's several different possibilities, and I don't want to go into any great detail on any of them, but I can assure
What would it likely look like?
If there was a full-blown war in the Korean Peninsula, just as Secretary of Defense Mattis said the other day, it would be tragic on an unbelievable scale, and the levels of violence would be immense, and it would be the likes of which the world hasn't seen since the Second World War. It would be huge, and there'd be huge amounts of casualties.
On both sides?
On both sides, yes. It would be horrific, but I don't want to go into the details of what that would look like, and that would get into the realm of speculation or contingency plans, and that would be inappropriate in an open hearing.
You emphasized in a recent interview that our soldiers need to, through their training, need to be able to be miserable again to, I don't think you used the term, but it was mentioned in an article in the On the Rocks magazine, embrace the suck, as they say in the Marine Corps and the Army. Are we conducting that kind of rigorous training right now, do you believe, that would prepare for that kind of T.R. Fehrenbach, like this kind of war?
Yes.
Where we don't have logistics bases, we have miserable conditions, people are suffering. Are we conducting that kind of training to prepare our forces?
Yes, we've shifted back to combined arms maneuver on a dynamic battlefield against a high-end near-peer threat. And we have shifted away from fixed sites, constant flows of logistics, in our training, constant flows of logistics, et cetera. And we have gone through 16 years of war where we conditioned as an institution COPS and FOBs, and some of those had pretty significant quality of life capabilities. Others were very austere. There were many COPs up in Afghanistan or Iraq that were not very well outfitted at all. But my point in saying what I said about being miserable is that we have got to train ourselves and condition ourselves for a type of war in which you are unlikely to have this steady stream of continued logistics beyond perhaps water, ammunition, food, and some medical. But all these other things, chew huts, hot showers every day, sleeping in a bed, and so on and so forth, those will probably not be available if we fight against a highly competitive, dynamic, regional, or near-peer power. The land battle will be unbelievably violent, and units will have to move every hour or two just to survive. And logistics and lines of communications will be cut off, and units are going to have to be able to be independent of thought and mind. Your communications are going to be degraded. It is going to be significant, and we need to train to that, and that's exactly how we've shifted our training in the last couple of years.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I want to quickly ask about the importance of our non-military agencies' programs to the Army's mission.